Hello, everyone. This is Joey Lindstrom at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. I see that people are still signing in, so we'll give folks about 1 minute to add themselves to the Zoom room, and then we'll get started. I'm joined today by Lacy Renee Dawson, who I'll introduce more fully in a little bit. Lacy is with the ACLU Michigan and has a lot of experience preparing advocates for how to protect against voter intimidation and voter suppression. And with that, I am going to try to share my screen. I think I've figured out how to do this without the beginning of the webinar delay that I've experienced the last couple of months. And so we will bring up our slides and start from the beginning. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, thanks so much for being here, and thanks so much for joining the 13th part of the Our Homes, Our Votes webinar series, third Thursdays at 3. Today we're going to talk about voter mobilization and specifically protecting people against voter intimidation and voter suppression. There will be time for Q&A during today's webinar, and if you have a question, please use the Q&A box in your webinar browser or actually use the chat box. We'll provide access to a video recording and a copy of today's slides to all participants following the webinar. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, you can email Brooke, whose email is at the bottom of the page, or you can put those technical difficulties in the chat box, and hopefully we'll be able to respond to those. I am going to pause there briefly for a technical consideration. Just have to fix something really quickly that relates to captions. And I am sorry. Okay, so the captions should be working now, is my hope, and you should find information about the captions in the chat box as well. All right, so the agenda for today is we're going to do a quick introduction. We'll do a review of Our Homes, Our Votes. We'll discuss becoming an affiliate of the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 effort. And then we'll talk about the Housing Providers Council and protecting against voter suppression and intimidation. That last part being our special topic for today. We are moving forward now, and it looks like we will have in a moment an American Sign Language interpreter as well once we have a video provided. Sorry, I have to, I think, work through the just one moment. The reality of another technical difficulty. Sorry, 1 second. Thank you everyone for your patience as we bring up the accessibility for our presenters. So our ASL interpreter should be able to show their video now, and then we should have a sign language interpretation for the rest of the webinar. Sorry for that delay, sorry for the technical difficulties, and I'm glad we're ready to move forward. Okay. So moving on from our agenda, which you see before you, we have our presenters. That's myself on the left, Joey Lindstrom. I'm with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And you'll see we have Lacy Renee Dawson on the right. Lacy, as I mentioned, is with ACLU Michigan, and she'll be presenting on our special topic today. I will begin, as I always do, with just a general overview of Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 and how we approach this campaign. We in Our Homes, Our Votes work to make sure that housing organizations and advocates throughout the country are registering low-income renters, are educating low-income renters, and then mobilizing them, getting them to the polls, and making sure their absentee ballots are successfully counted in the November election. We do this for a couple of reasons, and they're both pretty obvious. As you can see on the chart in front of you, there's always a voter disparity in turnout between renters and homeowners. And as you'll see, it's about a 20-point difference. This disparity is even bigger when you look at the disparities for household income. Voters with household incomes below $20,000 register and vote at much lower rates than voters with household incomes above $100,000. We know that our efforts to elevate the specter and the prominence of housing in the elections is getting some traction. We know that through a poll we did in 2019, 83% of the public agrees that elected officials are not paying enough attention to the cost of housing and the need for more affordable housing. 76% say they are more likely to vote for a candidate who has a detailed plan to make housing more affordable. Just a quick note on COVID-19 response. We do have some priority asks, and they've been the same for several months. I've included this slide at the beginning of the Our Homes, Our Votes webinars for several months now because we really expected that Congress would have taken action on an emergency spending plan. But as the coronavirus pandemic and recession continues to impact all aspects of American life, including elections, we think it's extremely important that Congress take action on the proposed $100 billion in emergency rent assistance that is in the HEROES Act, which passed through the House in May. Also, a comprehensive nationwide eviction moratorium. And many of you know that the Centers for Disease Control initiated a nationwide eviction moratorium, and that's excellent news. It does, however, go only until December. And it does require renters to produce some paperwork in order to be protected by the eviction moratorium. The eviction moratorium in the HEROES Act is much stronger and lasts longer, and we hope that'll be included in a final spending package. We also continue to push for $11.5 billion in emergency solutions grants to support the work of homeless service providers throughout the country. And we hope that you'll reach out to your members of Congress about this important legislation. Also, on the note of important legislation, want to call your attention once again to Senate Bill 3529, the Natural Disaster and Emergency Ballot Act. This is legislation that ensures all voters will have the option to request absentee balloting. It has 36 co-sponsors in the Senate. Currently, all are Democrats. The bill also requires at least 20 days of early voting to be available in all states. And it provides $3 million to the Election Assistance Commission to begin implementing all of the requirements. We're now at a point in the election calendar where passage of this bill, if that were to happen, would likely be too difficult to implement before the November election. But it's an important bill to pass for elections in future years, and it's an important bill that likely will be taken up again in the next Congress. We have been tracking shifting rules of what's happening state by state as different states are changing what their mailing ballot policies are and whether or not people need to request mail-in ballots and so forth. We've been keeping this information on our state-by-state pages at www.ourhomes-ourvotes.org. When you get to that page, you can just click on voting in your state or state-by-state information, and you'll get to a page that gives you information specific to your state. We've also been encouraging groups to join as an affiliate of the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 campaign. When you join as an affiliate, you get some free t-shirts and some posters and some stickers. We've gotten all of those in from our production team, and we're mailing them out throughout the country. We also provide access to branded images, posters, flyers, door hangers, and we amplify your efforts through our Twitter account and through our weekly e-newsletter. You also have expanded connections to NLIHC staff who can provide guidance for your efforts. So that's the overall update of what's happening with Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 and some background there. I'd like to turn it over now to Lacy Renee Dawson to take it over and work through our special topic. And Lacy, if you'll just tell me next slide, I'll be happy to advance the slides as you're going about your presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Joey. I really appreciate being here and just want to say hello to everyone out there. Hope that you're doing well under all of the circumstances that we're dealing with, and so glad that you are doing the work that you are doing. So today we're going to quickly talk about the whole topic, or the unfortunate topic, of voter suppression and what we need to do in order to be prepared to push back on voter suppression this election cycle. Next slide, please. So just to go through a definition of what voter suppression is, it basically is any action that is intended to deter or keep individuals or groups from voting. And it could look like almost anything. I mean, back in the 60s or in 50s, it looked like you needed to understand different laws and how to count beans in a jar. Today, it looks a lot different and it's a lot quieter, but it actually is there. And so we need to look at how voter suppression is going to show up during this election cycle. So we'll look at that real quick. Next slide, please, Joey. So one of the big election suppression tactics that I want to bring up first and foremost is just COVID in itself. It has turned our nation and our world on top of its toes. COVID has made voting in a lot of communities a lot more difficult, and it has also sent people into a frenzy around how am I going to actually do this? And so we need to be educating people that COVID is not going to stop our election. It is not going to stop us from being able to cast our ballots on November the 3rd. So that's number one. And we'll talk about some of the things that we could do around that shortly. Voter ID laws in across this country, but more specifically in Michigan, have been a way that has suppressed the vote for a long time. Then there's, of course, misinformation and propaganda. At one point in time, folks were being told if you were in bankruptcy, you couldn't vote, or if you were in foreclosure, you shouldn't vote. And so there are different institutions and entities across the country that may put out misinformation and propaganda to prevent individuals from voting. What I also wanted to bring up was just polling location closures. In a city like Detroit, where I live, it is sometimes difficult to get the correct information and timely information on when a polling location either changes or closes. Just this past election cycle, our city clerk worked diligently to ensure that voting locations were open. Unfortunately, some sites that are normally polling locations, churches, schools, etc., didn't want to take on that extra burden of cleaning up after the polling location would close, with COVID being a very expensive task to clean up. Some churches at the last minute said, you know, we just can't afford to do that. And so those locations closed, and individuals were not notified that your polling location would be open. So that is a tactic for voter suppression that we need to watch out for and be ready to actually mitigate. And also ensuring that notification of any changes about the election, whether it's we're sending out everyone in Michigan an absentee ballot application and how those applications are actually to be filled out. I know me, myself, I've gotten applications for voting from so many different sources. So knowing what source you're getting that application from is important, but just lack of notification of any types of changes to our voting system can be a suppressive tactic. And for me personally, I look at lack of education about the process as actually being a tactic for suppression. We register millions of people every year. These individuals are oftentimes young folks who for the first time ever have gotten into the ballot making process. They're getting ready to launch and hopefully use their voice in this process, but a lot of times they don't understand the process in itself. And if we're not actually out there educating, that is actually suppressing the vote. Last but not least, poll challengers. Poll challengers are going to be coming to a state and a polling location near you. Unfortunately, we didn't see as many poll challengers during the primary, but in 2018, a lot of poll challengers were dispersed across the state of Michigan. And so poll challengers are there to intimidate voters, to challenge voters, to try to push voters away from actually implementing their right to vote and activating their voice. So we want to be prepared for poll challengers as well. And then, you know, it's 2020. 2020 has been a year that has taken us through so many twists and turns. Our country is just going through a lot. We have fires that are happening in the West. We have COVID happening across, you know, the country. Who knows what voter suppression tactics could look like? but we do understand the definition. It's anything that is going to prevent voters from activating their right to vote. So when you see it, understand it, know it, let's make certain that we're able to push back on it. So instead of just talking about the problem, next slide, please. You might want to be asking, or you might be asking yourself, what can you do? What can we do to make certain that we have a great election? Next slide. It's kind of simple. It's a lot of work, but I want to encourage everyone. We have to educate, elevate people's trust in democracy, and engage as many voters as we can. You do that already through your social media platforms, through your organizing tactics, whatever work you do, making certain that we are educating voters, educating renters, elevating voters, elevating renters, engaging folks across this country. We also need to, when we hear misinformation, you can report that misinformation to the ACLU so that we can stay on top of that and we can debunk some of these myths. So we are the voices, we are that echo chamber for messaging. We want to make certain that we are debunking any myths that come into our space. And then we need to just keep motivating folks. It's hard. You know, it is really, really a hard way to go, worrying about everything that's happening in the world. But we must motivate individuals that we can take care of this election. We can make certain that people's voices are heard and that we will continue to do so. Next slide, please. So what I did here was there are several sites that you can visit that actually will give you resources, some downloads that you can use with your social media, and just some information that if you have questions, folks that you can reach out to. So the first is michiganvoting.org, and I will post links to these in the chat box when I'm done, but the ACLU and other partner organizations across the state have put together this special website, michiganvoting.org, and it has Know Your Rights guides and other types of information that you all can put your hands on, also other contact information. Of course, our Secretary of State, Ms. Jocelyn Benson, is on her job daily, so you can visit their website at, it's called MVIC, and I'll put that link in the chat also. There is a national organization called Ballot Ready, where you can input your information and it'll bring up your polling location, satellite sites. It's a very great resource. And then if there are any problems on election day that you see, or even throughout this entire process, you can always call the national hotline, which is operated by the Lawyers Guild, National Lawyers Guild, 1-866-OUR-VOTE. And that's a free voter hotline. It's actually manned by attorneys from all over the country and all across the state. They'll be able to answer any of your questions. So we have a lot of work to do. We can push back on voter suppression. This is what we do well as the country as we come together and bring this election to its full course, making certain that everyone has their voices heard. Next slide, please. So last but not least, we're saying no to voter suppression. We're not having voter suppression this year. And if we see it, we're gonna knock it on its knees and we're gonna move beyond it. And again, I really thank you all for doing the work that you do. I'll post the links in the chat and just look forward to a really successful election day on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lacy, for sharing all of that wonderful information. I'm putting into the chat box, I just put in the Election Protection Coalition website, which is www.866ourvote.org. And then also the Ballot Ready website is www.ballotready.org as well. I hope that many of you have a chance to take a look at these and that you can use those as resources. Thank you again, Lacy. And for those of you who have questions for Lacy, Renee, Dawson, we will get to the Q&A portion in really just a minute here, and then we can take your questions. one thing I wanted to remind you all of is one of the key methods of voter suppression that happens throughout the country is voter ID laws, and the way that these laws are used specifically to keep certain types of people from voting. The ACLU maintains a good website on this issue. You can also get good state-by-state information from an organization called Vote Riders, and their website is right here, right there on the screen in front of you. And you can go to voteriders.org, select your state, and find out what's needed for voter ID, and then additionally how to get that voter ID. There's also a national voter ID hotline, which you can find at 844-338-8743. And so.
And Joey, I'm sorry, I didn't mention, in Michigan, you do not, they will ask you sometimes for your ID. If you do not have an ID, and we need to let our voters know, you can sign an affidavit and get a regular ballot, not a provisional ballot, but a regular ballot. You basically are stating and signing an affidavit that you are who you say you are. And then other forms of ID that individuals can use in Michigan: a utility bill, student ID, anything from the government that would have your name and address on it, a piece of mail from government or anything. So we need to let folks know, if they're turned away from the polls on election day and they have not been told that they can sign an affidavit, that their rights to vote have been violated, and that they should reach out and call that 866 number and or demand to see an administrator or manager for that site. So thank you for bringing that up, Joey.
And thank you, Lacy Renee. I have a couple of quick reminders, and then we'll get to the question and answer portion of our session. One, don't forget, Vote Early Day is taking place on Saturday, October 24th, and I've got a link on the screen to learn more. Feel free to take a look at that link when you get the slides, or to grab it right now. We'll also put it in the chat box for you in just a little bit. And then, in addition to Vote Early Day, I have a reminder that there are new resources available that discuss safe voting in person on Election Day. Specifically, the Brennan Center has produced guidelines on ensuring healthy in-person voting, and it's a wonderful resource. I put the URL right there on screen, and you can find that guideline and download it, that list of guidelines, and download it at that website. At NLIHC, we put together a resource heavily informed by a similar resource that Nonprofit Vote made available about how to organize voter engagement events related to voter registration or voter education, and to do so in a way that practices safe social distancing and best practices about using sanitized materials and equipment and so forth, so that people who are using tablets or clipboards can do so with minimal risk to their health. So you can find our resource at ourhomes-ourvotes.org, and the Brennan Center resource is at the link that is currently on the screen. And so with that, I'd like to start moving through some of the questions that you might have for Lacy Renee Dawson or myself. So if you have questions, please do put them in the chat box or the Q&A. I think I can bring up the chat box here myself. And the first question we have for you, Lacy, is for people who witness voter misinformation, if people see flyers or other, messaging about, the wrong election date, or they can't vote if, they have parking tickets and things like that, what should they do? Who should they report the voter misinformation to?
You can report that information to the ACLU of Michigan. I'm assuming everyone here is in Michigan.
No, actually, this is nationwide.
Yeah, okay, nationwide. Hey, nation. Woo, never done a nationwide before. Thank you, Joey. Now I'm nervous. No, you should report that information to any ACLU branch, because of course we are nationwide. That 1-866 Our Vote number is a national number as well. If you have branches of the NAACP, you should definitely give them a call and contact them. I would also say your national as well, if you get that information up the pipeline, they are connected, very well connected to institutions across the nation. But for me, And for me, I would say if you get into the ACLU, we are really working hard to make certain that we can debunk that information. So 866 our vote, ACLU, use your network. Let's make certain we get that information up the chain so that it can be eliminated.
Thank
Hey,
you for that.
Lacy. Yeah, I have a question, Lacy. What can, if you're working the polls, like what can poll workers, is there anything that poll workers can do if they're being watched? When I worked at the polls, there was someone like that was watching me to see if I like messed up or anything, and so they could report us. Like, is there anything, and you mentioned the poll, I forget what you called them, the people that are intimidating voters, like,
Yeah,
is there
poll
anything,
challengers.
yeah, or is there anything that people working the polls can do?
It's a couple of things. So we, individuals can also volunteer to be poll challengers, to watch the challengers. I would definitely recommend that. But there are also laws and or rules for the poll challengers. So they should not be standing directly over you, really questioning you. You should contact the person that is managing that poll site. They know the laws, they know the rules. If you're feeling uncomfortable, flag them down and allow them to handle the poll challenger. I myself would not get into like any conversation with them, and I would direct them to the person or the administrator that is actually hosting or managing that election site. They should know how to deal with that individual and should deal with them so that you don't have to.
Great. And how do you sign up to be a poll challenger?
You can, well, technically, so this is a 501c3 conversation, I'm making an assumption.
Yeah.
But different parties, the different parties have poll challenger applications, etc. So you can contact someone there. The ACLU might, and different institutions may have poll challenger credentials. I know the NAACP offers it often. So you can definitely look into it, and I can get Joey more information on that to send to you all if you're interested. We need poll watchers. We need poll workers like never before in this country. So as many activists, as many folks that can need to go ahead and apply and become part of this democratic process so that we can have a very safe, secure, and valuable election cycle. So yeah, thank you for doing that, by the way, Tori. That is just, that's excellent.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm trying to do it this year too, so.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Next question for our expert guest is, Lacy, are there criminal penalties for people who spread election misinformation? Are there criminal penalties for poll challengers? Do the police ever get involved?
I know the police have gotten involved before, like to kind of break up scuffles and to distance individuals. As far as like criminal charges, not that I know of. I mean, we are a country of free speech, so normally the free speech is protected. I have not heard of a criminal investigation. I mean, we've had organizations that have put out wrong information, like the wrong election date, for instance, right? So there's no prosecution for that because their defense could be, well, it was a typo. So no criminal prosecution that I know of, unless it's very egregious. And right now I haven't seen or I've heard of any like egregiousness in that way. But yeah, police have been called to many polling locations for challengers. That's why you kind of, as a worker, want to kind of stay back and let that administrator or manager take care of that situation. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, it is your right to say, hey, see that individual over there, I can't deal with you right now. So yeah.
Quick reminder to everyone that if you have a question, please do submit it in the Q&A box or in the chat box. We do have another question here, Lacy. It's for people who face ballot challenges. What is a provisional ballot? When should that be filled out? And what does it mean for their vote getting counted?
So my understanding is that provisional ballots do not count unless there is a tie in the election, and they have to use those provisional ballots to break that tie. Provisional ballots are held for 7 days, and provisional ballots, They will take those ballots and they will try to, as much as they can, identify that person. I think they have like 7 days to go through that person to bring back their ID or proof that they are who they say they are. You really should never get a provisional ballot. Never. You should always push back on, I do not need a provisional ballot. I understand and I know the law and I demand a ballot. They have them in place, but we should definitely not be using them. So I wouldn't say that there was a time or a space for us to be utilizing provisional ballots. We just should not do it. It goes in a box and they do not count them unless the election is close. I mean, like a tie.
So to add a little additional detail to those of you on the call, provisional ballots are really kind of your backup option if they've determined that you don't have the correct voter ID or that you're not correctly registered, but you might be in a situation, or some of the people you might work with would be in a situation where they want to make sure they get a chance to vote, and so they can cast a provisional ballot, and the provisional ballot won't be counted on election night. It will only be counted if there's a recount or a very close election, and different states will have different rules on when provisional ballots are included. But if provisional ballots are included, the local county clerk or board of elections will reach out to the person who filled out the provisional ballot and try to work out whatever issues were preventing them from casting a regular ballot. So if it was the person didn't have the correct voter ID, or if their address was listed incorrectly, they'll try to resolve those discrepancies before they move forward with counting the provisional ballot. So a provisional ballot is a last resort. If you send people in your network to the polls and you feel they might not have the right voter ID, or if they're worried about voter intimidation, say, insist on casting a regular ballot, but don't leave until you cast at least a provisional ballot, I think is the best recommendation there. All right, so I think right now I'm at the bottom of the question and answers, and I'm gonna give folks just another minute to raise their hand or drop something else in the questions box. Oh, wow, we have a really excellent question here, and I'm not sure I have a good answer at this point, and it's how do you vote if you are displaced? And displaced in this case from the wildfires in California. Stuart, I can say in this case that in California, vote by mail is widely available. So if any person is registered to vote at a home that has been burnt down or that they have had to evacuate from, that mail-in ballot is still usable. If they can't receive their mail because of the fire and the displacement, mail-in ballots or early voting ballots can be picked up, ballots can be acquired at early voting sites throughout California. And we'll try to drop into the chat box or the follow-up notes where those early voting sites can be found in California. I think the best guidance will be in states that have significant early voting. Anyone who is correctly registered at an address from which they have been displaced will be able to vote at an early voting site, or using, in this case, a very legitimate reason for an absentee ballot. Being displaced from your home will be a legitimate reason to vote, even in the states that require excuses for absentee ballots. So for folks in California who have been displaced, they can request new mail-in ballots, or they can vote early by going to the early voting sites. That's a really excellent question, and thank you, Stuart, for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Other questions? I'm going to take a look in the Q&A box here.
Lacy, I guess I'll ask, so I just got on a webinar yesterday and it came up that people were asking, can I vote if I'm worried about my mail ballot being submitted? Can I also vote in person? And the answer for that is no. So like, how do we, I mean, you can bring your mail ballot to the polls in some places, but like, how do we get the messaging out clearly that like, you can't vote twice, like, and how can we address this misinformation that seems to be, you know, spreading? It's really worrisome to me, especially because the call I was on yesterday was with people who are service providers, and they're helping people with who are differently abled with, you know, mental health and physical disabilities and things like that. So we want to make sure like all the information we convey is accurate.
Mhm. So each of us have a voter ID number, and that is specific, just like our social security number, that is specific to us. And one of the reasons for that is to make certain we don't and can't vote twice. When, for instance, a friend of mine, she had forwarded her absentee ballot in the mail. We did the tracking like 2 weeks later and could not find it, could not locate it. It wasn't in any clerk's office or anything like that. So what she did, we informed her to go into Vote in Person, let them know that she had mailed in her ballot, spoil that first ballot, and then vote again.
Okay.
So, and from what I understand is that they're gonna check to see if you were on the registry to have received a ballot via mail, to see if they sent that out, and then they will supposedly they're supposed to automatically spoil that mail-in ballot and allow you to vote in person.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for, thanks for that.
Yeah.
We had another good question come in through the Q&A box, and I've provided some answers typed out in the Q&A box. It's for people who have no access to the internet through smartphones or computers, and this is very often people experiencing homelessness. Is there a physical location they can go to register to vote? And the answer to that question is yes. Go to City Hall. Go to the county offices. Elections ultimately are run by the county clerk or the city clerk, or in your community, it might be called a Board of Elections. Also, due to the National Voter Registration Act of 1993, more commonly known as the Motor Voter Law, every DMV office is required to have voter registration information. And in fact, the law requires any public assistance agency to also provide voter registration forms and information. So if there's an agency in your community that provides applications for Medicaid or SNAP benefits, those agencies should also be providing voter registration forms. That might not always be the case. They're certainly required to by law, but you might find that some of them just don't. Going to local government offices will always be an excellent place to get a paper registration form. Now, I offer that guidance, but I follow it to say that we are experiencing a lot of public offices are closed right now because of coronavirus, because of the pandemic. And so for people who can only register to vote in person and through paper, this can be a real significant barrier. And it's also a significant barrier, not just for registration, but for getting the ID cards that are needed in some states to vote. Because if the office you would go to get your voter ID isn't available, then you can't address that before November 3rd rolls along. So if this is a widespread concern in your community, I encourage you to reach out to your local League of Women Voters, or to reach out directly to your local election officials, the county clerk in most cases, or the Board of Elections, and work on some solutions with them. Perhaps they could provide paper registration forms that could be passed out to people who are homeless or people who don't have access to technology. Lacy, Renee, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think you did a superb job, and I love the League of Women Voters, and I love their voting guides. I have 8 boxes of voting guides sitting on my porch that were just delivered, so they are definitely a great resource for voter registration and other things. So yeah, I think you hit it on the head.
Yeah, and I think a bunch of chats came in as I was providing that answer. I think maybe before I got to saying that many offices are closed. I do think this is a unique moment where it is tougher to get those paper forms, and I think sometimes community organizers or service providers might have to get a stack of forms printed out and get those to people in a case-by-case basis.
Definitely. And service providers this year more than ever seem to really be digging in, so I am excited just to see so many folks helping with this election that don't normally do so. Yeah. Working together.
All right, I am looking for, a very helpful article was posted from the Statesman Journal in Oregon about how to get ballots if you've had to evacuate due to the wildfires. Thank you for posting that. I believe that was May. Really appreciate it. And looking for further questions. Right now, it looks like there are none. Oops, I somehow stopped sharing my screen. That'll make the recording look great. All right, we're back. We're back to screen sharing. So feel free to drop in any additional questions that come to you. I have just about 1 or 2 more minutes of content. First, reminding you that there are only 2 more sessions remaining in the Third Thursdays at 3 webinar series. We've done 13 of these now. I don't know how I'm going to live without them when they're gone. Next month, we're going to talk about Election Day. And that's going to be a very different webinar than what we thought it was going to be when we first planned it. We're going to be talking a lot about coronavirus and healthy voting on Election Day. And we'll be kind of trying to think through some solutions for helping people get to the polls when they have mobility concerns. And then our final webinar in the series will be in November, where we're going to talk about holding candidates to their campaign promises when they've talked about housing and given thoughts on plans that they are going to execute. Please remember, if you can, that the National Low-Income Housing Coalition is a membership organization, and all of our work, prominently including the work on Our Homes, Our Votes 2020, is supported by dues-paying members, either individuals or organizations. Please consider becoming a member today at nlihc.org/membership. Finally, please stay in touch. These are the organizers on our field team at NLIHC. You've heard from Tori today. Kyle and Brooke are key members of our team, and you can see on this map all of our contact information, phone number, email, and the states that we cover. So please do be in touch. We hope we get to talk to you about elections again soon. And with that, I'm going to do one final check to see if any other questions popped in. Let's see here. All right. So thank you everybody for joining us today. As I mentioned, we'll make sure that the links in the chat box and the slides from today's presentation will get out in the follow-up along with the recording. A big hearty thank you to Lacy, Renee, Dawson from the ACLU of Michigan.
No
Thanks.
problem.
We really appreciate having you. It really was a great presentation.
Thank you.
And for those of you who joined us, really appreciate it. Keep up your great work and let's be in touch. Bye, everyone.
Bye.